Lee District SSPA Task Force. I'm Ed Joseph, the chair. I thank everybody for being here. You, I'm sure, all know the drill at this point, so I've got a script to read that will enable us to hold this meeting online. So to conduct this meeting wholly electronically and to effectuate both the emergency procedures authorized by the Freedom of Information Act and the emergency ordinance, the Lee District SSPA Task Force needs to make certain findings and determinations for the record. First, because each member of the task force is participating in this meeting from a separate location, we must verify that a quorum of members is participating and that each member's voice is clear, audible, and an appropriate volume for all of the other members. Accordingly, I'm going to conduct a roll call and ask each task force member participating in this meeting to state your name and the location from which you are participating. And of course, it's perfectly acceptable to just say you're at home. I ask that each of you pay close attention to ensure that you can hear each of your colleagues. Following this roll call, we will vote to establish that every member can hear every other member. So starting with the roll call, Robert Livingstone. Don't believe I saw his name. Carol Allen.
Carol Allen at home.
Thank you, Carol. Rand Pixa.
Rand Pixa at home.
Rand, could you speak louder, please?
Rand Pixa at home.
Thank you. Alternate Andy Bernick. Don't think I saw Andy's name. Pamela Pineros. Pamela, are you out there? Or alternate Leslie Hatch. Moving on. Leah Lambus Skidmore.
Leah Lambus Skidmore from home.
Thank you. Larry Dempsey. Don't think I saw Larry's name. Jane Kelly. Were you able to join us, Jane? Moving on. Jeff Safel.
Jeff and Sona Safel of Island Creek, we are here.
Hi, Ed.
Very good. Hi, Sona. Thank you both. Tom Rickert.
Tom Rickert from home.
Thank you. Cindy Potter.
Cindy Potter, Lansdowne home.
Thank you. Jim Drinkard.
Jim Drinkard here from home.
Thank you. Rosemary Clay. Rosemary? I know Rosemary was with us earlier, but was having some problems with her audio. Liz Murphy, alternate. Liz?
Murphy here at home. Liz Murphy here at home.
Thank you. Very good. Thank you. Holly Doherty, I know can't join us tonight. Don Tennant. Don, are you out there? Moving on. Carl Sell.
Carl Sell at home.
Thank you. Marta Morrissey.
Marta Morrissey at home.
Thank you. Steve Levinson. Steve, are you there? Moving on. Tom Sachs.
Tom Sachs at home.
Thank you. Jim McCracken. Alternate Juliana Sharp. Or alternate Rachel Dexter.
Just a second, Ed. I'll unmute her.
Sure. Okay. Rachel?
Dexter. Yes, Rachel Dexter at home.
Very good. Thank you. John Tomko.
John Tomko at home.
Thank you. Richard Dresner. Are you with us, Richard? Moving on, Jonna Gagnon.
Jonna Gannon at home.
Okay, that completes our roll call. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15.
And Jane is
Yeah.
on. Jane is on the line too. If you want to, she's on the phone. So
Jane, could you state your name and where you are?
Jane at home.
Jane
you
Kelly
hear
at
me?
home.
Yes.
There, I can
Yes.
hear you. Yes, thank you.
And can
Okay,
you
so
hear me?
we
This is
have, I count 16. Who was that last one speaking?
Steve Levinson.
Steve Levinson. Thank you. I can hear you, obviously.
And
I
I'm
will-
here in beautiful downtown Springfield.
All right, so we're up to 17. Very good. Okay, thank you. All right, at this point, I will pass the virtual gavel to our esteemed Vice Chair, Tom Sachs, so I may be heard to make some necessary motions. Tom?
Do I hear any motions from the floor?
Indeed you do. I move that each member's voice may be adequately heard by each other member of the Lee District SSPA Task Force.
So do I hear a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 All opposed? Any abstentions? Motion is passed. Are there any other motions from the floor?
Yes, thank you. I move that the state of emergency caused by the COVID-19 pandemic makes it unsafe for the task force to physically assemble and unsafe for the public to physically attend any such meeting, and that as such, the Freedom of Information Act's usual procedures, which require the physical assembly of the task force and the physical presence of the public, cannot be implemented safely or practically. I further move that the task force may conduct this meeting electronically through a dedicated video and audio conferencing line, and that the public may access this meeting by registering through the meeting link on the Track a Plan Amendment page of the SSPA website, and or by calling 1-844-621-3956 and entering access code 2332-516-9506. It is so moved.
Is there a second?
Jonna seconds.
All in favor? Aye.
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 All opposed? Any abstentions? The motion is carried. Any more motions from the floor?
Next, I move that this meeting must be conducted online during the current emergency in order to discharge the lawful purposes, duties, and responsibilities of the Lee District SSPA Task Force.
Is there a second?
Jonna seconds.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion is carried.
Thank you, Tom. So next we'll move to approval of the minutes of the February 7th meeting. I sent out the draft of the minutes to all the members. Do I hear a motion to approve or any discussion about the minutes?
I move that we approve. This is Tom.
This is Jonna. I'll second.
Very good. With that, let's move to a vote. All in favor of approving the minutes, please signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed, please say no. Any abstentions?
I abstain.
Abstain.
Okay. I think the ayes have it. Minutes are approved as written. Next, I have some thank yous. I want to thank Leah Lambda Skidmore for serving as our secretary. As you probably know, she's resigned from that position. I want to thank Holly Doherty for volunteering to be our secretary going forward. And of course, I want to thank Tom Sachs for chairing our last meeting when I was not available. So thank you to everybody for that. thanks to you guys. Tonight we'll continue our consideration of the Vandoorne TSA proposed amendment to the comprehensive plan. Staff will update us on the impacts of the proposal to public facilities such as schools and parks. We'll then discuss the elements that should go into our recommendation for plan language, such as appropriate mix of uses, density, environmental requirements, access to metro, bike and pedestrian facilities, the proposed bridge connection to Oakwood Road, between Oakwood Road and Vine Street, et cetera. Hopefully by the end of the meeting, staff will have a good enough idea of what the task force would like to put in our recommendation so that they can begin drafting proposed language for us to consider at our next meeting. With that, I think we're ready to get started. And so I will turn things over to David Stinson and to take it away.
Thanks, Ed. Let me just start the slideshow. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes, we can see it.
Yes.
Wonderful. Great. All right. Well, good evening, everyone. I'm David Stenson with the Fairfax County Department of Planning and Development. Also in attendance tonight from the Department of Planning and Development are Clara Johnson, Mike Linsky, Steve Waller, and Corinne Bebeck. Additionally, Tom Burke from the Fairfax County Department of Transportation is with us as well. At this evening's task force meeting, we're going to resume the discussion of the plan amendment for the Vandoorne transit station area with the goal of developing a task force recommendation over the next few meetings. So we're going to start this evening's discussion with an update on school and parks in response to questions from the last task force meeting. We will then discuss elements of the task force recommendation and land use considerations, which will be followed by a question and comment session from the public and the task force as well. Then we will close with an overview of the potential next steps and the task force schedule moving forward. So before you is a timeline of the history of the Vandoorne TSA plan amendment and the proposed schedule moving forward. At the last task force meeting, we reviewed the transportation considerations. This evening, as Ed stated, we will start the discussion of land use considerations that will result in the development of the task force recommendations. After the task force and staff have developed recommendations, a staff report will then be published. And then after that, the task force and staff recommendations will be presented in public hearings to the Planning Commission and the Board of Supervisors. So we'll start this evening's discussion with a review of schools and parks. We initially reviewed the analysis of the schools serving the subject property last July. However, because the scope of the proposed development has changed, it would be beneficial to present the updated schools information to the task force. Additionally, I'm also going to present the projected park needs as well. So as I just stated, the information regarding schools was initially presented last July. However, the information this evening is updated to provide the most recent school membership data and the student generation rates of the latest proposal provided by the nominator. So the middle schools serving the subject property are Edison High School, Twain Middle School, and Bush Hill Elementary. The table before you shows the student membership as of September 2021 and the 5-year projection for the projected student membership and program capacity utilization for the school year 2026 and 2027. The 5-year student membership projections and individual school capacity evaluations are updated annually by Fairfax County Public Schools. These membership projections are not available beyond a 5-year horizon. So currently, Edison High School has a slight capacity deficit. Twain Middle School is approaching a capacity deficit, and Bush Hill Elementary School has a capacity surplus. It should also be noted that the modular building at Bush Hill Elementary is included in the determination of the school's capacity. Before you is the comparison of the potential student yield from the existing comprehensive plan, the board authorization, and the proposed comprehensive plan amendment, which are calculated by using the current countywide student yield ratio. Both the low-rise and mid-rise multifamily student yield ratios were tested for this plan amendment. Typically, low-rise multifamily residential units, which are residential structures of 4-story or less, generate more students than mid to high-rise residential units, which are residential structures of 5 stories or more. So the maximum residential development recommended by the existing comprehensive plan recommends a maximum of 467 multifamily residential units, which is projected to generate 52 to 154 students, depending on the type of multifamily residential development. And before I move on, does it make sense why I'm providing a range to everyone? And again, the reason I'm providing a range is we tested 2 different types of residential buildings, which are the mid-rise and low-rise. And again, the low-rise generates more student than the mid and high-rise scenario. So moving on, the initial scenario proposed by the nominators and authorized for study by the Board of Supervisors tested 1,243 multifamily residential units, and this proposal was projected to generate 140 to 409 students, which will result in 88 to 255 more students than the maximum residential development recommended by the current comprehensive plan. Now, the new development proposed by the nominators tested a maximum of 376 multifamily residential units, which generates 42 to 124 students, resulting in 10 to 28 students less than the maximum development potential that's recommended by the existing comprehensive plan. And next, I'll move on to parks. The urban parks framework is found in the policy plan and provides guidance for urban parkland standards to ensure the county's higher density areas provide spaces that contribute to a vibrant and healthy community. It also recommends minimum park acreage standards for residents and employees to estimate park needs generated by development proposals. It also should be noted that new development proposals are evaluated for park needs during the development review process. So the Urban Parks Framework recommends a minimum of 1.5 acres per 1,000 residents and 1 acre per 10,000 employees for local parkland in the county's urban and suburban mixed-use centers. So the maximum development potential that's recommended by the adopted comprehensive plan for the subject property, which by the way recommends a maximum of 467 multifamily residential units and approximately 1.1 million square feet of non-residential use, would require 1.4 acres of parkland. The latest development scenario proposed by the nominators, which proposes a maximum of 376 multifamily residential units and nearly 55,000 square feet of non-residential uses, would require approximately 1 acre of parkland. So if anyone, does anyone have any questions about the schools or parks before we
David,
move on?
this is Tom Sachs. How much parkland is in the revised plan that they've submitted?
The revised land plan, the park need is about 1 acre.
And how much is in the
I
plan?
say, Tom, yeah. How much is the plan proposing is what Tom is asking.
Well, how this works is they would submit a development review application at the time of rezoning, and that's when they would propose how much park they're proposing. But this development would require 1 acre of park under the urban parkland standards.
This is Carol Allen. Does the RPA that's being protected, which is a significant portion of the 5605 site, considered parkland?
No, that would not be considered parkland.
This is Marta Morrissey. Does that acreage need to be contiguous or can be split up?
No, it doesn't have to be continuous, no.
And this is Clara Johnson, and there are other park needs, and this is just from the urban parks framework. There are also other requirements about open space. There was reference to the RPA that would need to be protected. Sometimes a recreation use can be located near an environmentally sensitive area as long as it's not disruptive of it. You might have trails. And so all of that gets considered during development reviews. How to meet the recreational needs of the area, the new residents and employees, open space needs. And then I know a little bit later on, David will be raising a discussion about environmental protection. So, but this aspect of it, David's right. It doesn't have to be met contiguous to the site, but it should serve the people that live in the area and the new residents. So it needs to be close enough to do that at least.
Thank you.
All right, next we'll review the elements of the task force recommendation. As most of you know, the main role of the task force is to review the proposed plan amendment and based on that review, either recommend a change to the comprehensive plan or retain the existing comprehensive plan. If the task force does recommend a change to the comprehensive plan, then the task force is essentially making changes to the land use and density. If necessary, the recommendation can add conditions, which are recommendations in the comprehensive plan that can mitigate the impacts of new development, or describe a special consideration to be taken when the project is submitted for review. Conditions in the comprehensive plan often start out as issues or concerns identified by the task force. When issues or concerns are identified by the task force, the question should be asked, does the comprehensive plan already address this issue? Many times the policy plan or area-wide recommendations may already address an issue or concern, which would negate the need for a condition in the plan text. If an existing recommendation from the policy plan or area-wide recommendations does not address an issue or concern, then we need to ask how the issue or concern should be addressed. If the issue or concern warrants a condition, then the task force or staff may recommend a condition. So based on the previous task force discussions, the list of topics before you have been identified as issues or concerns. These topics include land use mix, density, compatibility of uses, parcel consolidation, metro station access, bicycle and pedestrian facilities, and the environment. These topics will inform the discussion that we're about to have of land use considerations. So we'll now review the land use considerations for the Vandoorne TSA plan amendment. To start, we will begin with the land use mix and density. At the last task force meeting, we reviewed the maximum development potential recommended by the adopted comprehensive plan recommendations. The initial development scenario authorized for study by the Board of Supervisors and the revised development scenario proposed by the nominators of the development proposals. The new development scenario proposed by the nominators is less intense than the maximum development potential recommended by the adopted comprehensive plan and the scenario authorized by the Board of Supervisors for this study. So I guess I'll begin this discussion by asking the task force, what are your thoughts about the new proposal?
This is Carol Allen from Brooklyn Bush Hill. We, as a adjacent neighbor, we like, obviously lower density is a positive from our perspective. We like, for the 5605, we like the considerable portion, the protection that they're doing for the RPA and preserving the wetlands. There are a couple of concerns with respect to the single-family homes and the location, and because of the topography. But I believe the updated proposal does not, I didn't see anything in the updated proposal that suggested an industrial or self-storage as a secondary use. which is a positive thing since we don't think that that's appropriate in a residential neighborhood. There's a need to look at the Lynn's proposal a little bit more, but we like to, and then there's always the question, some people like the idea of residential more than office, others like office because it doesn't have the impact on the schools and the weekend traffic. So it's positive based on density and it's not all like with the Kettler proposal is townhouses and not all apartments. So it's a little bit a nice buffer.
Thank you. Does anyone else have any thoughts, especially about the density or the new mix of uses?
And really what we're looking for is if you're generally favorable, have favorable views about it, unfavorable, and what those reasons might be.
This
Ed?
is Leah. Oh,
Yeah.
go ahead.
Ed?
Go ahead, Leah. I'm sorry, is that Carl?
Yes.
What is it, Carl?
I can't get excited about the protection of the RPA. I always thought that would be done so under the county environmental regulations because of steep slopes and that sort of thing. So that's, to me, the issue to me is still traffic. And we can't afford, I don't think we can afford to put any more traffic on South Vandoorne Street without some traffic improvements, and I don't see any in the proposal. And the only thing I can think of you can do is go to a full interchange at Vandoorne, or we've got to provide alternately some better access to the metro station. And there's access there. You can walk and go under a tunnel and that sort of stuff. That would have to be something that has to be improved. But the environmental issues, I think it's great that they finally recognize that steep slopes need to be protected. And I've always thought that over the years I've learned that that's environmentally that's got to happen. So I don't think they're giving us anything, quite frankly. That's something that they weren't going to get a site plan approved in the steep slopes anyway. So I just think the issue still comes down to traffic. I understand the schools are okay and the parks you're going to be okay. We've got a really good park system around there, but we can't take any more traffic on South Vandoorne Street. I'm sorry.
Okay. Thank you, Carl. It was Leah who wanted to speak, right?
Yeah.
Go ahead, Leah. I'm sorry.
That's okay. The decrease in density, I think, is good. I'd like to see much more mixed use in order to balance out the traffic. But the other thing that concerns me is the lack of the bridge that we've been talking about that really isn't going to get triggered with the less amount of density. I think instead of using the traffic load as a trigger for it, it should actually come in. I'm not sure how that happens as far as changing the words around, but I really do think that has to come into this mix in order for even this lower level of development to happen.
Ed?
Yes, who's speaking?
It's Tom Rickert. And
yes, Tom.
If I could say I agree with Leah, under the metro station access, it seems that they're getting all this density, but there's really not the access that would be there if the Beltway wasn't in the middle of this. And as I said last summer, in the capital improvement program from 21 to 25, they suggested a construction study for the connector between Oakwood and Vine Street. and the study hasn't been done. I think that this should at least trigger the study. As I said,
Okay.
that was on page 212, item 213, item 12, under transportation planning studies in the CIP.
Yeah, I believe you're the one who brought this up in the first place. And
Well,
I'm glad you did.
And
Yeah.
this whole thing's going to happen without that even being studied.
Well, we'll see about that. Anyone else?
I would just like to follow up on something that Carl and Tom mentioned, and that's the traffic. And obviously, we're concerned about the traffic. The current plan says that really nothing can be built on these properties until there's something done about the traffic on Vandoorne Street. And we're seeing a lot of development, and I know the traffic studies take all of the development that's been approved along the Vandoorne Street length into consideration, but there isn't anything that I've seen in either county or state plans to provide any improvement to those roadways and to improve the traffic flow on Vandoorne Street. And that was one of the concerns, that we've had right from the beginning. And that one of the things that was attractive on the, as I've mentioned before, with the commercial, is the traffic flows in the opposite direction of the community that's here today. And there's no traffic on the weekend, and there is no additional students in the school system. And so some of those impacts are not there. The lower density is fine. I think I would also like to see that bridge studied. I thought it was going to be studied as part of this. It might not need to be built as a result of these the developments, but we should look to see if there's any way to improve the traffic flow and put it into have the traffic flow from the newer developments on Oakwood out to Vine and take them on to Vandoorne Street on the other side of the Beltway. And it would reduce the traffic between, Franconia, Kingstown, and the Beltway.
Thank you, Carol. Who else has something they want to say? Please speak up. This is our opportunity to say what we want.
This is Tom.
Go ahead, Tom.
I really appreciate the lower amount of office space and housing, but I agree that the Vine Street study a bridge needs to be part of this. When I used to commute down Vandoorne, one of the things that caused the biggest tie-ups was traffic coming out of Vine Street turning toward Kingstown, because they'd end up blocking the northbound lanes because they couldn't get into the southbound lanes. So I'm not sure, even if they built a bridge to Vine Street, if that would make a big difference. I just think Vandoorne is so overwhelmed with traffic, and Alexandria is so pig-headed in terms of how they time their lights to keep commuters off of Vandoorne, that we're just going to make it much, much worse when we have traffic turning into Oakwood at the height of rush hour when people are heading north. So we need to do a lot more to mitigate the traffic before we can do anything to make this work. And I would recommend we get some kind of memorandum of agreement with Alexandria to improve the traffic flow on Vandoorne, or at least study it as part of this.
Well, Alexandria is looking at looking at returning the Vandoorne Duke Street interchange to an at-grade interchange. So that's going to make the traffic flow worse, in my opinion.
I agree.
As part of their redevelopment of Landmark.
Where you have all those additional traffic coming in.
Yep.
Okay.
Ed,
Who else has, yes?
history, Alexandria, as you know, is a city and it controls its own traffic. Fairfax County, we have to go with VDOT. Alexandria had decided that Vandoorne Street will be 4 lanes, and we've tried to get that to change that for years, and that's one of the bottleneck problems, that you go from 6 to 4 when you go from Fairfax County into Alexandria. So I don't know what you're going to do in Alexandria to improve anything until they decide they're going to widen Vandoorne Street. But the access from this property to the metro station and access onto the Beltway is critical, because if you can't get across, you can't go anywhere. And Tom's right. If you're trying to come out of Vine Street in the morning and turn left on Vandoorne Street, good luck. Thank you.
Okay. So obviously traffic is the big concern we're hearing from everybody. Anybody else want to speak up?
Clara. I wanted to ask the question a little bit differently. People have mentioned about how the current comprehensive plan says, this full option, the one FAR or more option, can't be achieved unless certain transportation improvements are made that mitigate the transportation impact. It also says, and I wish I don't have the wording, it also says about half of that development potential, though, could be achieved otherwise. And what was interesting to us, it wasn't a rationale for any thinking about this updated proposal. I think it's just coincidence that this is about half of the development potential of the current comprehensive plan. And so I don't know if is it any amount of development? Does it just need to, are your thoughts that it just needs to be less, or is it not even the amount of development, but show us how you address Vandoorne congestion? I mean, is that the underlying message? Do something about Vandoorne if you're going to add to the trips on it.
Yeah, for me, it's show what you're going to do to Vandoorne to make it flow from Kingstown all the way to the Beltway.
This is Leah. The system is broken now. I know that adding even half the development potential into that mix will make it even more broken. So, there has to be some other transportation mechanism that can flow away from Vandoorne instead of adding load to Vandoorne.
Excuse me.
Yeah, and here's another question. Go ahead.
Current comprehensive plan does not allow residential development until something is done about the traffic. So the current comprehensive plan is not the problem.
And it does state that until the traffic improvements are basically addressed, that you can't change what's built there, which may not, but it restricts the density that can be done. So it's
it
may not be any better, but
yeah, and I hear what you're all saying, and that's always a challenge with the comprehensive plan amendment, that the question that we ask with a plan amendment is often different than what people who are living in the community are often concerned with. You're concerned with what you're seeing on the ground now and how that could change with the proposed development. And of course, that's a part of the conversation. We're assuming that the comprehensive plan has this potential future, and we're trying to see if there's a better potential future and what conditions we would need to put on it to have that work. And so I'm trying to reconcile the concerns I'm hearing about the problems that exist now with this question that we need to answer. Is there a better alternative for the comprehensive plan than what's there now? I'm not sure if that makes sense. And that's the question that the traffic study asked too. That was the transportation study compared the current comprehensive plan to this proposal. And it also tried to show how the transportation network would work with this development, but you're right, it's on a foundation of what you already experience now.
Right.
And I know we have our transportation planner on the call and others on the call that may want to add questions of the task force about it.
There's a question in the chat from Ann Bloss, actually. Basically, you know, she's agreeing with the idea, with the concern about traffic, and she wants to know more about what the current plan, more about how the current plan expresses that something has to be done about traffic before development can occur. I'm not sure I said that very clearly. Was that understood? In other words, she wants to know what is it about, in what way does the current plan require that traffic be improved before further development can occur?
I think we understand that question.
Okay.
And I'll leave it to David or Michael Linsky to answer. I think they have the plan text in front of them. And
but we
This is Mike Linsky. I was just bringing it up to make sure I had it. And all this, you have to realize too that the plan for this area has sort of evolved over the years since the 90s. It hasn't changed a whole lot, but like things like the bridge, you know, the plans. There was originally a bridge farther east that was already going to be there and already going to be fixed up, and Oakwood and Vine were going to go extend to that. That existing bridge was taken down, and the bridge was moved over here, and the whole area wasn't totally replanned at that time. So there was this sort of vague language left in there. Plus there was other improvements like the interchange improvement that wasn't really defined. So it wasn't, this language is in there acknowledging that there are challenges to the area, but it didn't propose any specific, you know, solutions. So, but it does say that in general, traffic capacity and landing ID is limited, thus constraining the extent and character of development until suitable road improvements are made. And until this limitation is resolved, parcels in this land unit should continue in their current uses. And then it endorses infill development can be low intensity industrial or office uses up to 0.25 on the north side of Oakwood, or office use to 0.45 FAR on the south side. And then it goes on to say, so that's the base plan. And then it goes on to say, contingent upon provision of adequate roadway and transit access. So basically, if you can show that there's adequate roadway and transit access, theoretically, you might be able to do more. So I think it's, and that's what they're trying to do now. I think the nominators are showing that the lesser amount of intensity that they're proposing now is workable, you know, without the major improvements. So that would sort of meet that standard at some level. But and then as Clara was saying, in the transportation section of the area-wide text, there's a note about until additional capacity is determined and approved, only one half of the total development potential allowed in these land units may be constructed. So there was some acknowledgement that
I'm now in, but I have the same.
I'm sorry.
Somebody
has
their microphone on.
There's somebody needs to mute themselves.
To get it.
I think it's John Driggs.
I can see someone talking up there right now.
Okay. So anyway, there was some acknowledgement in the transportation section of the area-wide text that it says until additional capacity is determined and approved, only one half of the total development potential allowed in land units B, D, and E may be constructed. So I mean, I take that to mean that it's sort of acknowledging that there may be some level of development that may be, you know, considered until those limitations are dealt with. So I think that's kind of what we're discussing now. It's some lower, and like Clara said, this just so happens to be around, or it's actually around 0.4 FAR, so it's a little less than half of what the current plan recommends.
I
But
find it interesting that the current plan allows a greater density on the south side next to the residential neighborhoods than it does to the north side, which is adjacent to Vine, or the Beltway, which was interesting. And the reduced density is good. Maybe there's something in the transportation portion that talks a little bit more about how you see the traffic being mitigated in such a way that it's not overwhelming.
yes, I think the thing is that nobody had really done a full traffic study of this area in the last 30 years or whenever it was since this plan was originally sort of envisioned. And the current transportation analysis with the current proposals is the first time it's really been studied to that level. So that's the best information we have at the moment, if that makes sense. But another thing to bring up though, so I guess the alternative to the nominations that we're looking at, according to the plan, if we're assuming that the 1.0 mixed use is not very feasible anymore, then is the base level of development, which so you could ask yourselves, would you rather see that area fill out with additional industrial and low intensity office, if that's even feasible anymore? Because that's under the base plan, that's still a potential that could happen. So, you know, how would that be compared to the current proposal? That might be a more realistic alternative than the 1.0 mixed use. You might just see.
Right, Michael, and thanks for bringing that up, because whatever the recommendation is, we're going to need to explain it. Like, what is the vision for this area? And I'm going to suggest, this has been a really good discussion. We should keep, this is the fundamental question, but I think if we can kind of layer on some of those other considerations, we can keep talking about the land use mix and intensity, but maybe through the lens of some of the other issues, if that's okay. It doesn't mean that we're.
We seem, I mean, everyone who's spoken from the task force seems to agree that that study of the bridge needs to go forward.
Yeah.
And then beyond that, you know, I guess we need to talk about these other issues.
I was going to wait until we got to the, like, another access discussion. I think I will. I'll save my question for then, and we'll talk about the bridge some more. But yeah, I got it. Yeah, I got it. David, could we, I don't know, I don't remember what your next slide is.
Well, I guess if we're done with land use mix and intensity density, we'll.
Well, we're not done, but I'm suggesting we move on and, keep going. Yeah.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah.
So we touched on some of this already, which this next portion of our discussion will deal with compatibility of uses and parcel consolidation. So the subject area currently, as all of you know, but just for a reminder of those maybe from the viewers who don't, the subject area currently contains industrial uses and is bounded to the south and east by existing residential uses. The area-wide adopted comprehensive plan recommendation recommends substantial parcel consolidation and compatible transitions to adjacent residential areas. So the nomination for 5600 Oakwood Road, which is highlighted in blue on the map, is 112-acre parcel, which is owned by Kettler. The second nomination for 5604 Oakwood Road is highlighted in green, and this is comprised of 18 parcels, totaling 18.5 acres, and it has multiple owners. So one of the questions to get the discussion going is, does it work for parcels to develop separately, or should they all be together to develop?
Or something in between, where groups of parcels, if you can imagine groups of parcels that might develop.
The question is, we've got to have an overall game plan, and parcels can develop independently as long as they're part of the overall plan. So you can't get the impetus or the money or whatever to do the road improvements and the bridge and that sort of stuff unless you get development of the entire area. And I don't see moving forward with just two pieces of the pie unless you have a considerable it fits into the overall game plan. And this is, they're pulling these chunks out and developing them independently. How does that fit in with what is currently planned on the other parcels, A, B, C, and E? And I don't know the answer to that.
Well,
But you're, oh, go ahead, Carol. I'll say that.
well, the 5600 you have here, that parcel obviously is a significant chunk of Oakwood, and it has a plan, the revised plan. We did meet last week, several of us from Brooklyn Bush Hill, some of the folks who live on, share a boundary with Oakwood, met with Kettler, and they reviewed their plans with us and answered a lot of our questions as far as how they saw particularly the single family homes connecting and being an extension from one of the streets that's in our neighborhood. And the feedback I got was primarily positive, obviously some concerns. And we would, especially the folks who live adjacent to the 5400 to 5604 properties, would like to see them developed as a unit, as a group similar to what was presented by Lynn, because it's a little bit more, as opposed to, because those properties are zoned residential, commercial, industrial. So in consolidating them and coming up with a single plan for developing it as a single unit is preferable, because you've got consistency of what is there. And if we go with the residential, primarily residential, with the protection of the RPA on 5600, then it makes sense to have some consideration of what goes in the others, because you've got residential. And I think David made a comment in one of the previous meetings that you don't necessarily want residential or industrial at the end of that property, because then you've got people living in townhouses, and you've got industrial vehicles trapping by their, trunking by their homes every day. So I think looking at that, the way it's presented, and that one is a mix, and it's a mix of residential and commercial, but not industrial. So that's appealing to have it built out like that as a single, under a single plan.
This is Tom Sachs. I'm a little concerned because the map that shows the different parcels is not accurate. If I remember right, Parcel A has been developed or is in the process of being redeveloped as a land owner dealership. And everything across from 5600 Oakwood is multifamily income supported housing. Elderly
No, that's
housing.
not true. That's not true. 5600 is mostly undeveloped.
No, across from 5600.
Oh, across. Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
You mean
at the intersection of Oakwood and Vandoorne. So, it's showing there's lots of houses there, but there really aren't, I don't believe. I would also like to recommend phasing that 5400 to 5604 has to be developed before the residential at 5600, because of the concern of leaving it industrial and all those industrial vehicles having to go by all those residential units. So I'm very concerned that if it doesn't develop, people are going to move there into nice houses and yet have all this industrial traffic all the time. So that's my 2 cents.
Anyone else?
Yeah, this is Tom Rickard, Ed.
Go ahead, Tom.
I'm looking at the site-specific plan from 19 to 20, and there was a Wire Gill LLP. It was talking about land unit D. And he said, the plan recommends limiting office and industrial development in land unit D until suitable road improvement facilitates higher intensity TOD. And it also says, a new bridge across 495 is envisioned to connect Oakwood Road and Vine Street to improve the vehicular and pedestrian access within the TSA. So, I mean, they were talking about the same thing we're talking about now. That was from PC 19 LE 006.
Okay.
And I think, and that's a summary, I think, of that of the current comprehensive plan's mixed use option. That was, I think, written with the idea that this could be transit oriented development. I guess now would be, I wanted to ask a question about an earlier comment about if property developed in parts, over time, would there be enough coordination to pay for any necessary transportation improvements like the bridge? And I'm going to put Tom Burke on the spot. I wondered, even at that higher intensity option that's in the comprehensive plan, I wondered whether we would really expect that development, even if it was that development and Vine Street higher intensity development, whether those two, we would really expect that they would pay for that bridge. I think about the span over the Beltway. I would assume that they would contribute towards that kind of improvement, especially if it was demonstrated they needed it for their development.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
I was going to say, if they came in with a higher density or intensity and it was determined that the bridge was needed for them to mitigate their impact, then they would definitely be likely asked to pay a contribution. I'm not sure exactly. I'm the long range planner. We have others at DOT that handle the shorter range, the SEs and rezonings. But yeah, I'm pretty sure they would have been asked to contribute. In this case, since they're down planning, I'm not sure if that's the word. They're proposing something a lot less intense than what they have current approvals for, and they're able to show that the intersection at Oakwood and South Vandoorne works with the new proposal. It's hard to ask them for anything more than the land that would be needed for the bridge.
This is Tom Sachs. I don't think it's unreasonable to ask them to pay for the bridge if they want to do their development. They may not have the money to do it, and it may not be economically feasible, but Fairfax County is not going to have the money to pay for the bridge. If we can't pay to get a bridge at Vandoorne and Franconia, it's not going to come up. So if they want to develop, we can require them to pay for the bridge, or they don't need to develop.
I mean, maybe that's the bottom line.
Well, there might be a question of, I know with any kind of zoning case, whether there's nexus, we would have to be able to demonstrate that.
I was going to point out that in the plan, there's an expectation built into the land unit B plan. I think when this bridge was moved to this location, there was an additional option there for greater than 1.0 FAR if they help fund the bridge, basically. So that was the sort of funding mechanism, was primarily for land unit B. Not to say that maybe land unit D wouldn't be expected to contribute something towards it if they were doing, full build out, but I think there was always the expectation that land unit B would carry the brunt of it, and they're the really ones that needed it.
Are you saying land unit B as in Vine Street or land unit
Yeah,
D?
Vine Street. And I think the primary reason for the bridge was even
B.
back to the,
B as in boy, which is what we're talking about now is Vine Street.
Yeah, and even since the very beginning, I mean, one of the issues that they're trying to mitigate having secondary accesses was the Vine Street connection on the Vandoorne being potentially compromised when that interchange gets built. So Vine Street was always a little more dependent on the bridge, and it was envisioned for more intensive development than land unit D.
And I appreciate that we're getting detailed in the conversation, because we've said all along that it was not on the table to remove the bridge. The bridge is currently in the plan and it would stay in the plan. But what we're thinking about is if if an alternative plan option were put in place, what do we say about the bridge? You know, we don't want to, somebody already said, you know, we don't want to preclude the bridge from taking place, but there was this one way of looking at it that had to do with parcel consolidation, about whether that was any different, the order in which the development happened, would that affect some of this? And I know we have more discussion of the bridge coming up too. So we'll just keep having the conversation as you think of these comments. We'll take them in any order. Thank you.
So would I be correct in saying that we could put in an option for greater density contingent upon, you know, contributing to the building of the bridge?
I don't like that idea. This is Tom Sachs. Because again, there were articles in the paper today about how we're going to lose hundreds of millions of dollars in transportation funding through the repeal of the tax on groceries. And we may be able to get contributions from the developers, but the county's not going to be able to make up its contribution. So we'd have greater density, but no probability of a bridge coming in. So I don't think that's a good idea.
Your concern is they might contribute to a bridge, but the bridge, because the other portions of the funding would not be available, the bridge would not get built, and then we'd be left with greater density and no bridge.
That's exactly right.
I see.
And would we say that's a concern now? I mean, it's probably a concern for the plan as written now, and that doesn't change with the new plan option. Like it's a problem now and would continue unless we come up with a solution. Would that be fair?
And I would say one of the more major benefit for land unit D down here was just the pedestrian access to the metro. That's always been a bigger problem than the vehicular connection. I think the vehicular connection was more important for Vine Street, but for here, you know, the pedestrian. So something to think about, whether or not there could be an enhanced pedestrian.
And let's continue that pedestrian
yeah.
and accessibility discussion a little bit later, but I guess I really want to focus on parcel consolidation, and we haven't gotten to compatibility of uses, but how that would affect implementation or any other transportation improvements.
Can I just comment about this? All these issues are like 40 years old. And just remember that when the discussion first started on this property, there wasn't any metro at Vandoorne Street. So people thought, I guess, at that point that high density office is going to produce the money to build a bridge. And that's no longer true, I don't think. So I don't know what the answer is.
Could we, and then are there, the order in which somebody mentioned industrial traffic, and we'll get a chance to talk about the bridge again in a couple slides, but the order in which things develop and industrial, those existing industrial uses. Any other thoughts about that? I mean, there are places where residential development eventually shares roads with industrial uses. This is one road, one way out to Vandoorne, right? Is that generally the sentiment? Is that generally the view that, I guess I'm wondering, in the long term, there could be this vision for a predominantly residential area, but what about in the interim? You know, as this area changes, what are your thoughts about this over time?
Claire, this is Tom Sachs. I would say at a minimum that we should have parcel consolidation on 5400 to 5604 before anything can happen anywhere. Because if they don't consolidate, they can't build. And I really want 5400 to 5604 to build before 5600. So I would recommend we require that consolidation. I wouldn't have a problem changing the plan language to the new lower densities so we don't end up getting stuck with the higher densities because of the build by right. But I think we've got to be very careful about phasing here.
Any other thoughts on that?
Well, I think that 5400 and 50 to 5604 should be consolidated and built out as a single, with a single plan. As far as making development at 5600 dependent on that, I have mixed feelings on that. Because you've got a significant parcel of land owned by one owner, and they've got a plan for the entire parcel, as opposed to another one that's owned by 18 different owners with different zoning, and so it's sort of not as far along. I don't know, and you can't stop the businesses that are there already from. And it can be annoying. We have neighbors who hear some of those vehicles when they come down Oakwood because they back up to those properties. So I don't know how you address that. So it's I like the concept, but I don't know, do you want to tell one landowner that they can't go ahead with their plan on their property until somebody else does something else on another property, which who knows how long that will happen? I don't know if there's been anything done as far as actually consolidating those properties under a single owner. I don't know. Lynn might know, but I don't know what the plan is. Are they still 18 different owners with?
Yeah, and there are some property owners that own a few parcels.
Right, yeah, I know that. I've researched those properties before. I have a list with all the owners and I update it periodically.
Well,
you
I think
know
Lynn
better
is
than I
with
do.
us. Lynn, is there any prospect of consolidation?
I would say that a number of parcels are owned by my client, John Driggs, and others. And then there are other pieces that are owned by a gentleman named Mr. Wu. And I know that Mr. Driggs and Mr. Wu have been having conversations. And, I think that they're hopeful that they'll reach an agreement. But, they have not reached an agreement yet.
If they were to reach an agreement, would that be for all of these properties, or would there be like parcels interspersed that are owned by others?
There's only on the south side, which is what you're looking at there, the parcels in green on the south side, it is the owners are Mr. Driggs and his group and Mr. Wu. There's one intervening parcel. I believe that the gentleman, I don't know what the actual ownership name, but the person that I'm familiar with is Mr. Snow, and I don't know what his plans are. So there would be one intervening parcel.
Okay.
Okay, so the south side, there's a prospect that most of that south side could possibly be consolidated.
That's right.
Okay. I don't know. Maybe that informs our discussion a little bit.
Mm-hmm. And Anne asked a question about 5600. If they chose to develop by right, how would that compare to their current proposal?
Well, what's interesting is that they already have an entitlement. So you've all
That's
seen
right.
that.
For 850,000 square feet of office space.
So if that's one way of answering the question. The other way of answering it, because they of course haven't built that and they've had that approval for some time.
Yes, many years.
And again, I'll turn to people I rely on to keep track of details. What is the current zoning on that, David and Michael Linsky?
I guess it's PDC, right?
Yes.
The current
Or is it C
zoning?
yeah, but anyway, they can't do anything by right, basically, so they can either build out that plan, or they could come in for some amendment to that plan, or else they have to come in for an all-new rezoning, and in which case it would be evaluated against the comprehensive plan that we
So
have.
it's really that entitlement, or maybe they can modify that entitlement to such a point where they wouldn't need to come in for a whole
Although,
new approval.
Well, they have a
you
site
looked at against
plan
the
that was
plan at that
approved
point
by
too,
the
so
county,
Yeah.
don't they? I mean, they have a
did it get
site
to
plan.
site plan?
They have a site plan that was approved by the county.
Well,
don't know
the
if it was actually-
By the Board
rezoning
of
approval,
Supervisors.
I think it, at any rate, it would be so
a
old that it would,
development plan. It would have been a development of maybe a final development
Okay, a
plan.
development, well, yes, they have something that I have,
Yeah.
I don't have it with me, but I have a copy of it.
Yeah.
but unless they want to come in with super intensive office development like that, which is highly unlikely these days.
Well, in
it
today's
pretty much
market,
needs to
yeah.
come back in for a rezoning. I mean, that might play in their favor as far as, the amount of intensity that they have on the site entitled or something. But
So
still,
not
it's going to be
really an
evaluated against the current plan. So it would be the 1.0 mixed use option, or else they could probably down zone to just, the 0.5 office or something, I guess, the base plan. But
So are you saying that they couldn't build what was approved 10 years or so ago?
I mean,
They could, but
possibly, yeah.
without much change.
If there was a market for it.
Right, obviously, if there's a market, that's what's held it up for all this time.
And there's new environmental regulations, stormwater. I mean, there's things that would influence the site plan now that they would have to comply with.
Be
But still.
problematic, yeah.
Carol, was this the one with the skating rink?
No, that was someplace else. That was either in, I think that was in the 5400 to 5604 section, closer to La Vista.
It's just been through us so many times.
Yeah, that had a skating rink and it had a bunch of stuff down at that end.
David,
Does anybody else have?
Yeah.
I was just going to ask if anybody else had thoughts about consolidation of these parcels requiring that.
Yeah, this is Tom Rickard. I think that's a really good idea because, the plan needs to show some leadership. This is all, all these units, A through E, are in the transit station area, and they're trying to build transit-oriented development. If 5400 through my glasses, if the unit D, if there was a pedestrian bridge, maybe people would use the metro and go to work. Not industrial work with trucks and tools, but if it was some kind of school or an office or a recreational facility, and it was just a walk across the bridge to the metro, then you could have the residential up in the 5600.
So you're in favor of consolidation as well. Okay.
Yes.
Anyone else with
Ed?
thoughts?
Ed, this is Carl. This reminds me of
Yes,
back
Carl.
in the 1970s, why we have comprehensive planning to get away from incompatible uses. And here we have a classic example of that we're doing within the plan, or trying to do, to replan within an overall plan. We'd have incompatible uses, and that's not a good idea. It wasn't a good idea when we adopted a comprehensive plan, and it's not a good idea today.
So the incompatible uses you're referring to are the existing industrial uses?
Yes.
And the residential proposal for 5600?
Well, you have three uses, and the way they're configured, they're incompatible. Industrial doesn't belong being accessed through residential neighborhood. There used to be a rule against that, but I don't know if there still is, that you couldn't access industrial property through residential neighborhoods. But that's the problem, that you can't look at these things in a vacuum, and that's exactly what we're doing.
which leads us where? Does that lead you to a conclusion that we should not allow the residential option for 5,600? Or
I think it goes back to my
where does that lead
recommendation.
you?
I think it goes back to we phase and 5,400 to 5,604 needs to develop first before 5,600 so that we don't have the industrial.
Is that where you're going with this, Carl?
If you want to know the truth, I'm not sure where I'm going. But
okay.
It's a tough nut to crack, and to me, it's the reason why we have comprehensive planning overall, looking at the overall uses, and we're really not doing it here. And that's the reason we established the comprehensive plan in the first place. These site-specific plan amendments could be problems, and this is a good example of it.
Okay, so your point is that we shouldn't be doing site-specific planning in the first place? I'm not sure what your point is.
Yes, I would say this, and I would use this as my number one thing against it, because we're putting a 7-Eleven next to a community. The same we try to get away with that with the comprehensive plan, and we're just doing incompatible uses next to each other without making any changes on the rest of the properties. And you can't do that, I don't think. You don't want industrial traffic driving down Oakwood Road in front of residential units to get to industrial properties. Do you guys know what's back there on Vine Street and Oakwood Drive? You ought to go back there and drive it. One of the things is a crematorium. There's lots of unsavory, I don't know if that's a bad word, but a lot of activities down there that have been cleaned up over the years, but it's still not, it's not conducive to putting residential development in there where you're strictly going to drive by to get to the industrial uses, some of which are objectionable. The community next door objects to it. They didn't want self-storage back there. So, you know, that's objectionable to the people in Bush Hill, Brookland. What do you think it's going to be to the people who move in the multifamily units or the condos or whatever? I just can't do this thing in a vacuum, and that's what we're doing.
Yeah, I think one of the things that makes it difficult is, you know, from what Carl said, and I think it's been mentioned before, and it kind of frustrated me at the beginning, is that we're looking at changing the comprehensive plan in response to proposed developments for these two properties, instead of looking at how does the county want the undeveloped land or the undeveloped land in B and D and a small strip of E developed. What do we want there?
Hallelujah.
And so we're trying to sort of, we've got the cart a little bit before the horse, so it makes it a little bit difficult to look, you know, what's going to go in at Vine. If we put a bridge in there, what's going to be at Vine? Is it going to be all industrial? And then you've got a bridge between an industrial area and Oakwood, which would have a residential and commercial. It's, you know, that's, you know, so it's kind of, that's the thing that I find a little bit difficult, is that it seems to be out of sequence.
And I will say it's a challenge, because while we're not looking at Vine Street for this potential plan amendment, Vine Street also has a mixed use option in the plan, and it gets back to not even just planning. You can plan an area. This particular slide is talking about groupings of properties and the order in which things might be appropriate for development, and that's a great point. Vine Street, you know, what is it appropriate? Should we? Is it realistic? All different questions. to expect Vine Street to develop at the same time as this development. Probably
Well,
not.
I understand,
Yeah.
but it's
Just restating the problem.
the comprehensive plan
Yeah.
should be developed to reflect what the county wants to see in the TSA, not what it wants to see. Try to fit it to meet something else, but this is what we want to see in this particular area, and we put the plan in place, and then you might need a little tweak here and there for a specific development, but not necessarily try to develop the comprehensive plan for the whole TSA based on, these are significant portions of the undeveloped properties, but
yes,
that's what makes it difficult to try to figure out what to do.
Yeah. I will say that is the question for staff. Is this, we looked at the current mixed use option and we've been asking ourselves, does this have a strong relationship to the metro? If that bridge were in place, would it have a strong relationship to metro? Is it possible that the best possible development for this has a closer relationship to the neighborhood, still with good access to metro, if we can improve that? But it's a strange transit station area. I've worked in other transit station areas, and boy, this portion of the transit station area is tough. Even if you did have that bridge, and I know there's another slide where we're going to talk about access. Does that happen to be the next slide, David?
It does happen to be the next one.
Okay.
Clara, this whole thing is so frustrating because honestly, this shouldn't even be a transit station area without the bridge. It's only a transit station area if you include the bridge, because these properties have no easy access to metro as things stand currently. So
yeah, and if we could show the next slide.
That's why it's so hard to wrap your head around all of this.
Well, here's what I wanted to say. And if David, if you could go to the next slide, I think the other problem with the bridge that at least keeps our team awake at night is even if you did put the bridge in place, you're really still just giving them access to another road that takes you out to Vandoorne. And it's not direct access to the metro. It's a whole other step. It's a whole other step to get access to the metro station. If from Vine Street, that's having to get agreements from rail, from the state, from CRX. They have planned improvements for rail. Getting access directly to metro would require some doing. It's not a foregone conclusion that could happen. So what would the bridge actually accomplish? I'm not saying it would be a bad thing. It would add connectivity, which is generally always a good thing. But it doesn't get you to the services, and it doesn't get you to metro. So with that, David, you probably had some things to say about this slide and some questions, and we can keep talking about access and the bridge. Yep.
I think you said it well, Claire, that the connections between the Vandoorne metro station and the subject property are they're difficult. Right now, they're impeded by the Capitol Beltway, the railroad, and the metro tracks. Because as everyone knows, yes, you have to walk, even though the station platform is in Fairfax County, the entrance and station facilities are in the city of Alexandria. Right now, the distance to the station, depending on how fast you walk, it's 10 to 15 minutes from the subject property. And again, it's along a route of shared use paths and sidewalks that are not even complete and very circuitous. So currently, though, the area-wide recommendations in the comp plan do recommend that we do any development along this area improves pedestrian and bicycle access to the metro station. So I guess in light of that guidance, what additional opportunities are there for additional plan guidance for improved access to the metro station? I'm sure everyone has some thoughts on that.
Ed, it's Tom Rickard again. I think
Go ahead, Tom. You're not going to mention the bridge, are you?
Well, I'm going to mention maybe having a study, which was, suggested in the CIP to help guide people through this development. They could quantify or quantitate how much a bridge would cost if it was just pedestrian, if it was for vehicular. But to have transit-oriented development where you have to get in a car to drive to the metro just doesn't make sense to me.
Right. And that would have to include a connection between Vine Street and the metro platform.
Well, then we're peeling back the layers of the onion.
Yeah, because there'd be no point without that.
I mean, I think one point here is that, I mean, it is walkable from, it may not be suitable for the 1.0 transit station area guidance. It's, for that level of development, but what we're talking about now is sort of down planning to more of just a residential neighborhood scale, in which case, it is walkable. You have to go under the freeway and, and around and all that stuff, but it is still a walkable location for Metro. But whether or not, so basically what we're talking about is sort of recognizing that higher intensity transit oriented development may not be feasible on this side of the Beltway due to all the constraints. And we're talking about an option that's, less intense, but there are benefits to being still this close from the Metro, even though it's not right next door, I guess.
We have residents who walk to the metro using the path that goes down under the Beltway and the railroad tracks and all to the metro. So seeing that improved is going to be a big plus for them. So it would be, coming out through Oakwood, if you'd have that path improved there would be access to the metro that way. The problem with this is, I think it was Ed said, is that it's a transit area, but you have to cross the Beltway, you have to cross the railroad tracks, you can get all the way to the other side to get to it. It is walkable, but it's not the easiest walk.
And one of the things the area-wide guidance encourages is actually, and that could be, this development of this area could be leveraged to provide better connections from those existing neighborhoods, to the metro, not across the Beltway maybe, but like better access to the existing underpass and maybe improvements to the underpass or.
Yeah, let's, well, I think I'd like to ask the group and people who live in the area if there are any any improvements that could possibly make that a more attractive walk, a more direct walk. And if it's not to Metro, are there people that take any transit on Vandoorne? Are there, what is that walk like, getting to any of those bus stops? If anybody in the meeting happens to know, I think we're looking for, there's the possibility that we could add language to a recommendation. If this were to come to a recommendation, we could just in general terms restate the importance of looking for improvements, accessibility, access to transit, whether it's bus, bike, metro. But if there's something specific that we could be aware of, that's something that we could identify as a consideration.
I know the city of Alexandria is talking about putting a bus rapid transit in to that metro station.
Right.
And there's at least, I know the idea of, at some point extending that through, say, to Kingstown has been knocked around. I don't know how realistic that is. But, there's at least some talk of that, I believe. So, just putting that out there, I don't know that that gets us anywhere.
Yeah. Well, there was that study that was done back in 2012, 2015 timeframe. It was done with the city of Alexandria, Fairfax County, and WMATA about how they could improve access to the metro, and improving that path on Oakwood was one of them. or not on Oakwood, the path on Vandoorne was one of them, but I don't know, when I took the Metro when I was working, I always went over to Huntington because I could park. Couldn't park here. So,
And I guess that there is talk now of express lanes potentially coming in on 495, and maybe there might be interchange, and there probably have to be interchange improvements associated with that. So that might be an opportunity to improve pedestrian connection underneath there at least.
Well, yeah.
Well, that was there was an improvement done to that just in the last couple of years. When you walk under the Beltway, it's actually like an elevated bridge over a concrete slope. And they took out the old one, they put in a new one, but it's very, I've never walked it myself, but it's narrow and there's no space to expand it. So unless they were talking about, demolishing the existing overpass and building a new one with a wider underpass, I don't know.
If you look at the I-66 improvements, I mean, the I-66 improvements are providing sort of tunnels basically underneath the various intersections to get the the bike trail through there and different things. So I mean, there's
tunnels present a whole new set of problems, I guess. So it's a thorny problem that I don't see a good solution, unless we build both the bridge over the Beltway and the pedestrian access from Vine Street to the metro station.
In the last presentation, we did mention that there is a project funded for 2023 to improve the shared use path along South Vandoorne from Oakwood to the underpass. But I do think there's going to be a lot. We need to continue to look at the connections beyond the underpass.
What about the existing neighborhood to the south of this study area? What about improving that connection to that one pedestrian path?
One of the things depends on what you want. I mean, we've looked at the comprehensive plan. I know they're not road connectivities, but when you start looking at doing significant improvement, there was with the current plan that was approved for 5605, it did have a path that would come from Brooklyn Bush Hill through, I don't know if it was on, to be perfectly honest with you, I don't know which parcel it was because I think it's more over here, but it would take a path through that property for access to get down to the metro area, a path that way. But some of the things that were in the WMATA study where they're looking at improving them to provide access for not only pedestrian, but for bicycle, they looked fairly substantial. And one of them went from our community through the Oakwood property and actually connected through Oakwood over, I think, to Vandoorne. And looking at something like that is not necessarily attractive because if you've got bike paths that are that wide and they go down that far, you've got two-way traffic. That if we can get down there, they can get into the community. And the WMATA plan had 4 paths like that going from our community in the area of Gunnell Estates into Oakwood and over to Vandoorne, and that we need to look at that and to see what kind of an impact it would have overall. It's maybe attractive, maybe not. I mean, I ran into somebody in the community who had lost his girlfriend. They were staying at the hotel and they got some things from the hotel on paths and where to walk, and they ended up in my community and got separated and couldn't find each other. So I said, how did that happen? I don't know. They must not have had phones, but it's, so there's other concerns about what it does to opening up the community from that area too.
add, this is Rachel. I would add, I agree with looking at that, because you also don't want to be short-sighted and build it just for pedestrians and then find out, as we saw with COVID, there's a huge influx in people riding bikes, and they've put a lot of effort into increasing the bike paths. And so looking at what would be the difference between making it pedestrian access only versus bike, I would just be cautious to limit it to pedestrian only and then find out a couple of years down the road that now there's a big interest in biking and there's no opportunity now to widen it for bikes.
I would say that the current comprehensive plan already encourages expanding on the bike and pedestrian network. And I think I just had wanted to hear what existing residents, what their experience has been, and if there'd be interest in getting better connectivity to the county's, kind of to that pedestrian fabric and emerging bicycle network.
I'd have to, get the word out to the community and get feedback from them. We focused primarily on the development and what would be going in back there over the last year or so.
And that's fair. And it's a tough question to answer when you don't have a specific design. I get that. So this would all be in concept. And I would say that the comprehensive plan already encourages that. But if there isn't anything specific to add to that current guidance, then maybe it's not necessary.
Right. And I said, and I wasn't aware of any plans along that way or any considerations until Ann had pointed me to the LaMotta study. And I don't know who, if anybody, from our community was involved in that. So.
Okay, thanks. I appreciate the discussion. Thank you.
Can I add that under the Fairfax County website, the South Vandoorne Street Shared Use Path is requests for public hearing are due March 13th, Friday. And they're talking about a shared, it's a 10-foot wide, it's for bicycles and pedestrians. It runs all the way along Vandoorne till it goes under the Beltway. So some decisions are going to be made soon.
And there are, I want to acknowledge Anne is making comments and asking questions, and we do make a copy of that. So we are getting it. And I noticed she just made a comment that flashed on my screen about that maybe the neighborhood isn't the focus of people, of transit ridership. And that wouldn't be the primary focus, but if there's an opportunity to connect, then, looking at what that would mean. So that if for any residents that do wish to make their way to transit, they could have perhaps a more direct route. Okay, so I don't know if
this is Tom, and I was going to ask, would it be feasible or realistic to say that we are not willing to move forward on this comprehensive plan change until all of the parcels are consolidated and a plan for better transportation, access to metro, and development of all plans, of all the parcels consistently is able to happen? So we're not just doing a couple of those pieces? Because that's kind of what I'm hearing is we're doing it piecemeal, and it doesn't make a lot of sense to do it piecemeal.
So if the recommendation were to not support a plan amendment, and then those reasons were explained, that might live in a staff report, it might live in a separate memo, but then it doesn't live in the comprehensive plan. Another way, whatever conditions the task force wants to recommend, a plan option with conditions is kind of what we're talking about tonight. We're kind of trying it on. What would a recommendation look like? What kinds of things might there be conditions about? Trying it on for size, see if you like it. That's another way that your recommendation lives for longer or is more visible, I'll say. If there are conditions we can write about compatibility, about phasing or consolidation, or what kinds of transportation improvements or transportation studies might need to be considered. Of course, and this would be the task force recommendation. Staff always tries to reach consensus with the task force, but of course we might differ. It's not David, Mike, and I that write the recommendation. Sure, we draft it, but we have all of the department that then vets it and reviews it and signs off on the new recommendation. So that's kind of the process that we're trying out at this meeting, if that makes sense. I don't know if that answers your question. So yes, you can recommend against it and explain why, but another way to do it is through a plan recommendation with conditions.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. So where does that leave us for the moment?
David, do we have more slides?
Well, we had a slide on the Oakwood Road Vine Street connector, which we've talked about, as well as the environment. But I also wanted to say that it was, it's 8:45 now. Are we going to give the public any opportunity to comment at this point?
Well, we certainly hope to. Can you maybe show your slides with a brief explanation, and
sure,
hopefully we can move on?
Well, as we stated, the adopted comp plan does recommend a multimodal bridge connecting Oakwood Road to Vine Street across the Beltway in order to facilitate redevelopment of the Vine Street corridor. And the transportation analysis for the proposed use along Oakwood Road concluded that this development does not require a bridge connection to Vine Street for transportation purposes. But I do also want to note that the study is not proposing to remove the Oakwood Vine Street connector from the comp plan. So again, we've had this discussion about the bridge, and I guess
we can move on to probably the next slide, since we've talked about it.
Okay, sure. So the last consideration we will review is environment. Again, the subject property is located in the Cameron Run watershed. And additionally, the subject property is located at 5605 Oakwood Road, contains a resource protection area. And as everyone knows, resource protection areas are designed by the county to comply with the Chesapeake Bay Ordinance, and the purpose of the Chesapeake Bay Ordinance is to protect local streams that drain into the Chesapeake Bay. The area of the subject property classified as a resource protection area per the Chesapeake Bay Ordinance is protected from most development. Additionally, the subject property is also subject to transportation generated noise from the Beltway. And finally, the subject property contains marine clay soils, which are prone to shrinkage and swelling. And then this next slide, the policy plan does contain recommendations for stormwater management, the preservation of resource protection area or RPAs, as well as minimizing human exposure to transportation generated noises and the mitigation of problem soils. So I guess, does anyone have any questions about how these policies would be applied?
Not hearing anybody speaking up. So if there's no comment on these issues from the task force, let's open the floor up to the members of the public for comments. And so if you are a member of the public, you should be able to raise your electronic hand by clicking on participants, and then at the bottom of the window that opens up, there'll be a little hand. So just click on that, and that will raise your electronic hand. We should be able to see it. And then when you're finished your comment or question, please click that same button again to take your hand back down.
I noticed Anne had a comment or a question. What does minimizing noise involve? And I don't know if we still have Corrine on the line.
Hi, yes, this is Corinne Babak from the Planning Division of DPD. I'm with the Environment and Development Review Group. So minimizing noise, that's a comprehensive plan recommendation that applies to residential development as well as office development. And so what we get with that is during the entitlement process, the applicant will submit a transportation noise study, which not only looks at current transportation noise levels, but also looks at them into the future. And so minimizing noise impacts to these uses would be enhanced building materials. So having more durable windows or different types of building materials, different insulation so that you're not hearing as much of that noise inside. That also looks like sound walls. So 495, there are some of those already there. Those don't always minimize all of the noise, so there might need to be additional mitigation measures included, but that's something that we look at through the entitlement process, and then applicants do proffer to meet those recommendations. Later during the site plan process, applicants will provide these refined analyses that really get into the details of what needs to be provided through the construction to ensure that the policy is met as well as the proffer. I hope that answers your question. Sorry, that was a little long-winded.
No, I appreciate it. Part of this is an education for me. How realistic are sound walls? Is it something that happens regularly? Is that something we can realistically expect, or is that one of the kind of hard to do categories?
So with your road sources such as 495, I'd definitely say you're going to get a sound wall with something like that. Something that would get more of a fence is something that isn't as intense of a roadway. I don't have a better transportation classification for that right now, but something that wouldn't require a full wall would be something that you could address through a board-on-board fence or something that's wooden with no gaps. And when we do get transportation noise studies, they'll include, if a barrier is needed, they'll include a barrier analysis. If fences are needed, they'll include specifications for the fence. So what gaps are allowed, or what gap is really going to make the fence not do its job. And that's all part of this one package, if you will.
Thanks. I just want to observe, just to put it out there. This is not a question. I think a sound wall would be necessary in this case. I live fairly close to the Beltway myself, and I think that the sound wall is something to predict in the future.
And to that point, if there is a future expansion of I-495, there would be some sort of environmental assessment that's done with that, and part of that would include upgraded noise wall recommendations. So if you're familiar with 66 and the Transform 66 project, there are a lot of segments of those noise walls that were old and falling apart, and through the road widening and expansion, they have upgraded those to solid materials that should last for a while. So if there is some expansion through that, that is also an opportunity to enhance that.
Okay. Is there anybody else, members of the public, with questions or comments?
I'm not seeing any more hands raised at this point, Ed.
No, neither am I.
From the public.
Ed, this is Lori Greenleaf. I tried to raise my hand.
I'm sorry, Laurie. I never saw that. Go ahead.
Yeah, Laurie's on the panel, so I did not.
Okay, thanks.
And you represent the 5600 for Kettler, the owner of 5600, right?
Correct.
Okay.
So full disclosure, we do represent Kettler in this endeavor. And I just wanted to say a couple of things about the discussion. First of all, it's fascinating discussion, and I think you all have come to the right conclusion about how odd this TOD area is. The Beltway and the rail is a huge barrier. And really what that points to is, in our opinion, that decreased density is a smart thing here. Just as a point of reference, and we can send this to staff. I don't think it was in our transportation or the transportation analysis that was done for this. Even at a 0.5 FAR, which is, as you all have read, the plan language, possible without the bridge and improvements, the traffic generated from the current plan proposals is drastically less. So current proposal is probably, I think, almost 1,400 trips a day less than a 0.5 office. So that's, something to think about. And really what that means is that a reduction in density, plan density, recommended plan density, I think is a smart thing for the traffic in the area. The discussion about the bridge, I don't know that that necessarily is going to be the answer for the traffic generation, mostly because it has so much hair on it, as Clara mentioned. You've got the rail. It does not have direct access. That bridge would not have direct access to Metro. And one last thing on compatibility and consolidation. If you are talking about less density, and this is not necessarily a TOD area, then what should you be compatible with in this area when you're looking at this land bay and this comprehensive plan? And I think it's the residential uses to the south. This is not a unique situation. I mean, the county has replanned property all over, and it's always an issue of compatibility and consolidation. And I do think it's dangerous to say one property owner has to develop before another for the plan to work. You're looking at this comprehensive plan area. And there are ways, for instance, in Westfield, there was some replanning done in the Westfield area, which is all office industrial zoning to allow some residential. There were issues with airport noise. And that was resolved during the comprehensive planning and zoning stages with disclosures to residences and things like that. So I think there are ways to make these uses compatible that don't involve dictating which properties have to develop first. Thanks.
Thanks, Laurie. Is there anyone else, whether a member of public or the task force or anyone else who has anything they wish to say? I hear no voices. I see no hands up. Okay, well, we're getting close to 9 o'clock. I guess I'll turn it back to staff for potential next steps and moving forward.
Thanks, Ed. So before you is the potential next steps for this plan amendment. At the next meeting, March 28th, we will continue the discussion of the task force recommendations, which may include the review of draft plan text. In the spring, the staff report will be published, and we hope by the summer to have the planning commission the planning commission and the board of supervisors hearings.
So it looks like we may well need a task force meeting in April if we can't vote on recommendations on March 28th. I think the most likely date for that looks like it would be April 25th. I don't know if anybody has any comments about that date. But absent some strong objection, I think that's the date we'd be looking at. I'm hearing no objection, so I guess that's our April date if needed. Okay, well, I think we're ready to adjourn.
This is Tom Sachs. I do have one question.
Go ahead, Tom.
How does the Brandon Avenue fit into the plan? Because we still haven't gotten anywhere with that.
Well, I think go ahead, David.
We plan to present plan text at the next meeting for Brandon Avenue on March 28th.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think the next meeting will be split probably split the discussion. The conversation about Vandoorne, I think we'll use draft plan text as a vehicle to look at how we would write some conditions based on this discussion. I wouldn't expect the task force to vote on that at the next meeting. It's not like that. I don't think based on the discussion, there's so much clarity and consensus that we could just write plan text that said all of those things or addressed all those things. But I think we can start and use that as a vehicle. And I think Brandon
So
will also do that.
We should expect draft plan text on March 28th. We will discuss and assuming we're not ready to take a vote on either or both, then we will be back on April 25th.
Can I request the draft text be sent out a couple days in advance so we don't just come into the meeting seeing it for the first time?
Yeah, we will distribute it Thursday or Friday before the task force meeting if it works.
Thank you. All right. We have a motion to adjourn.
I move to adjourn.
Second.
Anybody object? We are adjourned.
Have a good one, everybody. Stay safe.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Good night.
Night.
Thank you.